Well, welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Amy Waywell. I'm the Director of Membership at the MFA, and I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's lecture, Power of the People, Art and Democracy. We so appreciate your ongoing support and your participation in the MFA's virtual member lecture series. As a reminder, this program is coming to you virtually from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Founded in 1870, the MFA stands on a site that has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different Algonquin nations, including the Massachusetts. As a museum, we acknowledge the long histories of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. Now, before I introduce tonight's speaker, I have a few logistical notes for you. A transcript and closed captions are available during this program. To enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window and click the button Show Captions. And during the presentation, please use Zoom's Q&A function to ask questions and share any comments. And please note that this lecture is being recorded, and we anticipate making it available on the MFA's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Phoebe Segal is the Mary Bryce Comstock Senior Curator of Greek and Roman Art. She holds a PhD in art history and archaeology from Columbia University and has excavated in Greece, Italy, and Cyprus. She has curated numerous exhibitions and gallery renovations at the MFA, most recently the early Greek gallery on the second floor of the George D. and Margot Barakis wing. She is currently writing a book on the MFA's famous Etruscan sarcophagi featuring married couples embracing for eternity. Phoebe, thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about this exhibition.
Thank you, Amy, and to the entire membership department for giving me this opportunity. And thank you all for coming. The snow has not yet arrived, but perhaps people are settling in and getting warm and cozy this evening. I wanted to first thank the individuals who contributed funds to make this show possible. Daphne Hatsopoulos, Robert Strassler, Alice and Nick Galakatos, and an anonymous donor. And also say that the exhibition is up just for 9 more days. It closes on February 16th. So I hope that if you haven't had a chance to make it in thus far, that you have the opportunity to do so in the next 10 days. This exhibition, apologies while I get the hang of this. There we go. This exhibition represents a huge amount of teamwork. In addition to the usual departments that are required to pull off an exhibition, design, interpretation, learning, and community engagement, this exhibition is a collaboration between 7 different curatorial departments that lent their works and 4 conservation labs due to the multimedia nature of the material. And also includes, as I'll share with you a little bit tonight, voices from outside the museum as well as within. This exhibition represents a long gestating idea, one that started to bubble up for me when we were renovating the Greek and Roman galleries. That project was completed in 2021, but it really began with a series of conversations in 2018. And it includes nearly 180 works of art, all but 10 from the MFA's collection. The star alone of the show, which you can see on the right in the introductory space, is a work by the Cambridge-based artist Tamashi Jackson, who's just concluded a big show at the Tufts University Art Gallery. And the exhibition draws on the strengths of the MFA's unique collection, its deep, preeminent collections in ancient Greek and Roman art, but also in American art, and really is appropriate for Boston as the home, or one of the homes, of the American Revolution, and also a center for the abolitionist movement and other socially progressive movements. This exhibition would not have been the same, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, due to the enriching of the collection with strategic acquisition. So more than half of the works of art on view have been acquired in the last 10 to 15 years. And there are many collecting stories that I would love to explore, but we don't have enough time for them tonight. But I'll try to point out where I can some of the donors and the strategic acquisitions that made a show like this possible. So the exhibition began with a simple question, or maybe not so simple. What does democracy look like? So how is our ideas about democracy expressed in visual terms, in art and in visual media? And the process began with a seminar style course in which I mentored the six Boston public school students that you see here on the screen over the course of an academic year. So 2022 to 2023. This is the Curatorial Study Hall program, which is one of the 3 teen programs. These are the best programs at the MFA. Just young people being welcomed into our institution, being paid for their work, and teaching us more than we learned from them. We met weekly with curatorial colleagues from across the museum, and we explored their collections through the lens of this question: what does democracy look like? And I'm excited to say that all of the students contributed label text to the exhibition. You can see a sample from Sophia Shatsky, who's now a Boston University student, on the right. And so they added their voices to our curatorial voices. We also included a cohort of, or we heard from and shared what we heard from a cohort of college students, former interns, and some present interns at the MFA as part of the MFA Pathways program, and a video featuring the 5 students exploring their thoughts about democracy and the role of the museum as a place of civic learning. Is featured in the exhibition, as is an interview with our longtime and beloved colleague, Barry Gaither, the director of the National Center for Afro-American Artists in Roxbury. With partners across the museum, we organized voter registration and early voting at the museum. And we built a space in the exhibition for programming and performances. And the performance that you see in the photograph on the right is a collaboration with Emerson College. So yet more young people involved in the exhibition. And that performance took place on November 15th and 16th. And it was a contemporary riff on the Greek comic playwright Aristophanes' Assemblywomen. This is a play that was produced in the first decade of the 4th century BCE. And in it, the women of Athens take over the affairs of the state. They dress up as men. Of course, in the original play, it was male actors on stage dressing up as women, dressing up as men. And the women of Athens are determined to govern more effectively than their husbands, who they claim are risk takers and not good at managing the budget, the finances of the state. And it was riotously funny and also much appreciated by the audiences. So I'll just continue with some of the discussions that we had internally, and just say that having this space for performance and conversation, I failed to add that the exhibition in this particular space that we're looking at now was also the site, in addition to the performance, of City Talks, and which featured leaders from around Boston, and that holding these conversations, not just with the public, but also with students, has a really meaningful impact, I think, on all the participants, and really draws us closer to the art by making it come alive to us. The exhibition unfolds in 3 chapters over 3 rooms, but there are several, and there was no, obvious way, right way or wrong way to organize an exhibition about a concept like democracy. But there are several themes that run throughout. And the first one is a bigger claim that I'm going to make about works of art in general, but one that particularly applies to works of art that illustrate democracy or comment on democracy, and that is that um, works of art both reflect and mirror a society's values, and also affirm them and reaffirm them, so that there's this feedback loop that we see over and over again. Um, and that means that artists have the ability, this is another theme that runs throughout the exhibition, to actually affect how people think about democracy, and to create new discourse and affect and move discourses in one direction or another. And then the other major theme that runs throughout all the 3 rooms is the gap, or the distance, between our aspirations for democracy, so the perfect, the ideal, and then the realities of democracies. So those are just kind of 3 themes that run all the way through the show. The promise of democracy, the first room, and it's to your left, oops, sorry, it's to your left as you enter the exhibition, is where we explore most conspicuously the narratives that are told about democracies, how they came to be, who's included, and how symbols of democracy are created in visual culture. And so this is sort of the first grouping in that room, and it addresses the question: if democracy is ruled by the people, who are the people, and how are they visualized? So really thinking about how citizens are visualized, who has the right to be depicted, who has the right to be a citizen, and who gets depicted as a citizen. And in this grouping, we explore how, since ancient Greek and Roman antiquity, artists, patrons, and audiences have visualized citizenship through portraiture. The earliest Greek portraits, these were made around 400 BC, were set up in public spaces to honor citizens' exceptional distinction. Generals, statesmen, poets, and philosophers. You see the philosopher Socrates when you enter the exhibition. In Rome, the award of a public statue elevated a private citizen to a glorified status, yielding immense social and political benefits. Artists in the 1700s and the 1800s, like Jean-Antoine Houdon, looked back to who sculpted the bust of George Washington in the center, looked back to the classical portraits to depict their definition of the ideal citizen, which, while limited to a specific class and race then, has evolved and expanded as artists continue this practice today. These portraits, and I'm going to mention the one on the left here, this photograph by Tyler Mitchell. These portraits speak not only to artists' capacity to represent their times, but also their ability to highlight identities previously excluded from full citizenship, and to expand the repertoire of attributes and characteristics a good citizen should have, like being a loving parent, for example. The Federalist Papers, which is a wonderful, wonderful loan lent to us by generous donors Liz and George Krupp, is a collection of 85 essay-style letters published during the ratification debates of the late 1780s, which decided whether or not to approve the Constitution of the newly created United States. And I should say that I began the label for this two-volume book by saying this is a book that really wasn't a book, because they were letters that appeared in newspapers. The three then anonymous authors, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, collectively adopted the pseudonym Publius, referring to Publius Valerius Publicola, the Roman consul who restored the Republic in 509 BC. The letters are addressed to the people of the state of New York and lay out arguments in favor of the Constitution while also exposing its shortcomings. A glance at the essay's titles show that Publius's concerns are still relevant today. And I think just in this moment, it's so powerful to think about a public debate that is for something, but also acknowledging the pitfalls, and being really open and honest about that. This print presents an extravagant arch detailed with BIPOC American achievements, covering the exterior walls, proud pillars of South America and Africa in the back, and acknowledged and unacknowledged precedents. Here, Los Angeles-based artist Sando Burke proposes a new monument of American history, one with only people of color. Showcasing often neglected events from America's creation, Burke removes the quote-unquote whiteout that obscured American history, revealing the hidden foundation of the U.S. underneath. And actually, the work itself is called Whiteout. The composition is based on an epic work of political propaganda from the 16th century, Albrecht Dürer's triumphal arch of Maximilian I. You see examples of the folio, the Dürer folio on the left. Burke adopts Dürer's grayscale format of multiple narrative vignettes to instead represent American glory through the lens of people of color. And this work was the only work acquired specifically for the exhibition. And it's an incredible learning opportunity. Every time I approach it, I learn something new, and I really encourage you to spend a lot of time with it when you visit the exhibition. And these are just some details from the vignettes, and you'll see very familiar faces like Muhammad Ali. We see some of our recent politicians in this detail here, Kamala Harris and Barack Obama, and so forth. The vessel that you see on the right, which is a fragmentary vessel, was found in beneath a monument, which you see here in the center, a monument that was dedicated to the Athenian warrior Dexileus, an aristocrat who died in the Corinthian War in 394 BCE. At that time, many Athenian citizens were suffering economically, and Athens was politically divided. Like, actually, as divided as we are. The image's presence in Dexileus's tomb creates tension between the tyrannicide's celebration of democratic values, and which you see on the right, and I'll mention that in a moment, and the aristocratic nature of this monument, that is the funerary relief. The two figures represented in the vase on the right represent a group of statues that the Athenians erected to commemorate the assassination of a tyrant, Hippias. Well, it was actually the assassination of his brother. Through this act, the heroes paved the way for founding the Athenian democracy a few years later. So what I just read you is actually like a summary. It's a kind of a simplified version of the story. And I read it because it highlights that the way in which the Athenians took a story and an event that was motivated actually by a personal vendetta. The assassination of the tyrant's brother was motivated by a personal vendetta, and then after the democracy was established, repurposed that story and gave it a democratic intention. So this is an example of the stories that are told about democracies, even when part of it is a little bit fibbing or twisting. Stories and images of legendary heroes slaying monsters and beasts have existed for thousands of years. The Greeks adapted much of their poetic and visual repertoire from primarily Mesopotamian, Babylonian, and Assyrian models. But those models were often intended as political propaganda, with protagonists associated with royal power. This is what the image of Heracles on the right is in some sense alluding to. When told in the context of a democracy or a republic, such as Judith in Florence on the left, images of tyrant slayers were repurposed to instead celebrate the people. Here we have a Roman coin on the left and an Argentine medal from the early 20th century on the right. What people wear has conveyed political messages for centuries. Formerly enslaved Romans wore the felt domed-shaped pileus, you see here. The Liberty Cap, to show they recently gained freedom. After murdering Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, Brutus, one of the two assassins, issued coins that featured a liberty cap between two daggers to announce that he freed Rome from tyranny. The motif survived through Renaissance medals and was later adopted by American and then French revolutionaries as symbols of freedom. Artists conflated the Liberty Cap with a similar headpiece with a bent tip called the Phrygian cap. That's what's represented here in the medal, which was worn by mythological figures associated with ancient Phrygia in modern-day Turkey. Depictions of the Liberty Cap did not end in 18th century America and France, as you can see on the right. In Martin Puryear's etching from the year 2012, he also took up this form of the Phrygian cap in sculpture as well. Artists are still engaging with its form in meeting today, both Puryear and then also we saw the Argentine medal in the earlier slide. And in the center here, you see a bonnet rouge that is actually was made 100 years after the French Revolution to commemorate, to commemorate the storming of the Bastille. And then on the left is an early American weather vane in which Lady Liberty is wearing the Freedom Cap as well as she holds an American flag that is fluttering in the wind. I love that. One of the most important features of democracies is the peaceful transfer of power. In the Greek author Plutarch's Parallel Lives, which was written around 100 CE, Lycurgus assumed, the Spartan king Lycurgus assumed the throne after the death of his brother Polydectes to become the king of Sparta. But soon afterward, he learned that his brother's wife was with child. After Lycurgus's nephew's birth, the Spartan king bestowed Charlaus, his baby nephew, who's here represented as an infant, he bestowed the rightful kingship to his nephew and assumed the role of regent. Thereby, that's why this painting is called The Magnanimity of Lycurgus. Here, Le Barbier, the French painter, this is a fairly recent acquisition, celebrates Lycurgus's peaceful transfer of power, perhaps suggesting his hope that the French Revolution, too, would come to a peaceful end. On the right, in Capital Offense, the Connecticut-based artist William Evertson presents the events of January 6th, 2021, and connects it to the only other time the U.S. Capitol was breached. The center left portion of the woodcut, so about here, is based on an earlier print depicting the burning of Washington by British troops in 1814. And we see here that distant past, maybe not so distant, mingles with the recent past as scenes of war and fire ablaze are accompanied by rioters, one carrying, um, one wrapped in the US flag and another one using a flagpole seemingly as a weapon. This is not the only example in the exhibition of an American flag being repurposed as a weapon. The French revolutionary government thought that time could be democratized. In 1793, they legislated a method of secular timekeeping, decimal time, to replace the Catholic Church-based system used for centuries prior, as part of a greater effort to free their new society from religious restrictions imposed by the French monarchy. This sundial, the only known example and featuring revolutionary imagery and slogans, you can see this inscription down here, was dedicated to citizen Jean-César Batelier, a clockmaker active at Sèvres. Ironically, though, Sèvres served as the chief porcelain manufactory for the French monarchy. Ultimately, the new calendar was abandoned after 17 months. But from a historical perspective, this remarkable object captures a moment in time, which is to say that this timekeeping object is one of the remnants of this move to reconfigure time. And I think something, we don't typically think about how our time is structured, it's sort of laid down, but it is something of a political or religious act to structure time in such a way. In 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave his State of the Union address, telling Americans of World War II's threat to democracy in the country and throughout the world. In his speech, he mentioned what he believed to be were four universal freedoms: of speech, of worship, from want, and from fear. And he stated that people everywhere in the world should have a right to each of these freedoms. The next year, Norman Rockwell, wanting to do more to support the war effort, decided to depict those freedoms. Originally paintings, which are now in the Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Mass., these images were reproduced in the Saturday Evening Post and in posters promoting war bonds. You can see those here. Reprinted countless times and widely circulated, these posters were cherished then. And they are still important objects of American history and visual culture. However, over time, people have felt that these prints perpetuate the idea of an exclusively white, small town America. So it's both things at once. The next room we'll enter is called The Practice of Democracy. So in this room, we're really focusing on, if we're focusing on the idea that if democracy is a system of government in which the people rule, how does that happen? How do people participate? This is obviously a very sensitive topic at the moment. So the two major themes in this room of the exhibition are the importance of the vote as the central instrument of democracy. So by that, I mean the obligation to vote, which we see expressed here in the Shepard Fairey poster from the 2008 presidential election. And on the right, sorry, I'm not going to, but one second. So not just the obligation to, but also access to the vote. And lastly, the integrity of the vote. So on the right, we see Cyrus Dallin, the sculptor of the Appeal to the Great Spirit, on our front lawn, memorializing the influential writer, abolitionist, and suffragette Julia Ward Howe, who lived from 1819 until 1910, with this portrait shortly after her death. This portrait was commissioned by the New England Women's Club and gifted to the museum soon thereafter. Julia Ward moved to Boston in 1841 and married physician and fellow abolitionist Samuel Gridley Howe shortly after. She lectured widely, she wrote copiously, And upon visiting Abraham Lincoln in 1861, she was inspired to write the popular Union song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, lyrics of which, the most famous lyrics of which are inscribed on the relief. And she remained an activist until her death. However, she didn't actually live to see suffrage. But I felt that it was really important to include, and this just was an amazing find in the collection, to really throw a spotlight on Bostonian women. And I wish we could do a whole exhibition about them, actually. On the left is probably one of the most famous paintings in our collection, The Sower by Jean-François Millet. And we included him here. It's somewhat of a surprise for people, because I learned from my wonderful colleague, Katie Hansen, that this painting was that in 1850, the year that Millet painted The Sower, a conservative law was passed in France that said that required male voters to provide tax records verifying that they had inhabited the same domicile continuously for 3 years in order to be able to vote. And so it's after attaining universal male suffrage, then this law, which was really a regressive and conservative law, effectively disenfranchised migrant and itinerant workers like the sower. So it's an example of how voter suppression has been practiced in many times and places. These two works, the one on the right, which is the photo of it is not the one was not taken in the exhibition, but rather in a different context. This is the work by Tamashi Jackson, which I mentioned earlier, is in the exhibition introductory space. It's called Contradiction, and it's an incredibly layered multimedia work in which the artist has brought together multiple elements. In green, you see painted on the background surface a photograph from the head of a voter registration line, a very long voter registration line in 1948, and then printed on the vinyl, the red vinyl over, and which is draped over the canvas, is a photograph from the signing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. There's much more to say about this work, but I wanted to mention that it includes marble dust from the quarry used to build the monuments of the Athenian democracy that you now see on the Acropolis. And then in brown around the edge, top left edge, is soil from Lucy Depp Park, a stop on the Underground Railroad in Ohio, which is where this work debuted and where Tamashi is really mining the history of voter disenfranchisement and suppression in Ohio's Black communities. And then on the left is a work by a quilt that is really the result of a collaboration between the feminist artist Faith Ringgold, who passed away last year, and her daughter, the cultural critic Michelle Wallace. And here, Ringgold is calling attention in the central panel to the women, to some of the women who were so influential and important in the civil rights movement. So to the right of Dr. King, his wife, Coretta Scott King, who's depicted here as a widow, Ella Baker, who was an organizational leader, Fannie Lou Hamer, and the better known Rosa Parks. And around this central panel is text, a transcription of text that comes from a speech that Michelle Wallace gave on Martin Luther King Day in 1987. This work was made in 1988 and acquired by the MFA in 1991, which I think was probably quite an innovative purchase at that time. I wasn't here then, but it's an early example of the collection really becoming much more inclusive. and representative. Through this painting of a U.S. map, Jean Quick-to-See Smith, who sadly passed away within the last week to 10 days, who was a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, questions who's represented in a democracy. She said about this picture that this is a living map of tribes that exist today. Quick-to-See Smith uses the technique of paint dripping to visualize the washing away of these communities. And you'll note that the Ohio Valley, which we were just talking about, Ohio, is actually empty of all of its tribes. To this day, several tribes are still waiting for the U.S. to recognize them, to officially be called Native Americans. In light of their long history of persecution, stolen land, and forced assimilation, Native Americans still live under a colonial system. Between 1999 and 2003, Paul Shambroom photographed more than 150 meetings in towns across the United States with populations of less than 2,000 in the hope of documenting what he described as, quote, the body that represented the smallest increment of local government, end quote. And I want to pause on this for a moment because we do tend to think about government as being just the federal government, but we know that our local governments are so important. Through compositions like this one, with its stark symmetry and grand scale, Shambroom lends gravitas to the everyday work of small-town government. The technique, a digital image printed on canvas, suggests an association with the long tradition of history painting, the images we are accustomed to seeing in government buildings and that adorn the Capitol and so forth, other public buildings. So we've now entered, we were talking about voting, and now we've entered the section of this room that is really about public service, so how the actual government works, how self-government works. And this pairing here is intended to raise the issue of justice and the jury system. So on the left, we see the photographer Jim Dow, who was a longtime professor at the SMFA across the street, who was employed by the Seagram Bicentennial Courthouse Archives Project. He was one of 24 photographers that went around the country in 1976 documenting through photography this architectural form of county courthouses. And I spent quite a lot of time, or we as a group with the students spent a lot of time investigating this image and trying to think about our own expectations and what we bring to it, because there were a variety of different expected outcomes looking at an empty jury box. I had a more idealistic, maybe perhaps optimistic view of the disposition of these unknown jurors, and some of the students expressed more skepticism about their how they would be judged. And then we see on the right this tendency to idealize or idealize the notion of blind justice. So we see the European conception of justice personified as a woman holding a sword in one hand and a pair of scales in the left. And in this one, she's actually wearing a blindfold, suggesting impartiality or the aspiration of impartiality. In these three inscriptions from the Greek city of Assos. Assos was a Greek city located in present-day Turkey, which the MFA has the good fortune to have received a large portion of the finds from that from the excavation there, which was carried out by the recently founded Archaeological Institute of America, which was founded in Boston just a few years after the MFA. And when the finds were brought back from Turkey, or then it was the Ottoman Empire, these inscriptions, along with other finds, were gifted to the MFA. And each of the inscriptions refers to a public official. So on the left, is a relief that honors a judge. In the center is a decree that states that the people of Assos voted not to appoint a tax collector. Love the connection to the past through taxes. And on the right is an inscription honoring a military official, which brings us to another section or acknowledgement of the importance of military service. Here we see combat service on the left in John Trumbull's Death of General Warren, which John Trumbull didn't observe up close. He was a few miles away, so he wasn't right at the Battle of Bunker's Hill, but he was in the vicinity and had served in the army. And then on the right, we see a Greek hoplite, so a young warrior infantryman getting ready to go off to war, saying goodbye to his elderly father. And just to note that in the Peloponnesian War, during which time this picture was painted, Athens lost a third of its adult male population to combat and to plague. So these images are quite poignant. In the third room, we take up the issue of how we as citizens preserve our democracy. So that is to say, you voted, assuming that you have the right, and but let's say, and maybe it went your way and maybe it didn't. What are the other methods by which we can raise our voices? How can we do that? So it's really important in a democracy to see and be seen, and to listen and to be heard. And in this room, we're really exploring the importance of the freedom of our First Amendment rights, so freedom of speech and of assembly, and how those freedoms strengthen democracy by bringing different voices and perspectives into dialogue. So the idea, again, that that transparency protects against tyranny. Most of the art in this room was made by artists advocating for social change. Other works, particularly photographs, capture key moments that led to radical changes in society. And you see here the Liberty Bowl, the most important artifact of the American Revolution, which we are so lucky to have in our institution, and which was brought into the collection in 1949, partially through crowd-funded monies. The story is that Boston school children brought in some portion of their allowances to contribute to this acquisition, which is a very democratic, an indication of the importance of democracy. I'm going to not say too much about it here, other than this beautiful object. It was an object of protest, and in it, in the inscription, the Glorious 92 are praised for refusing to rescind their letter to their fellow colonists, suggesting that they not pay the taxes that the crown was requiring, and that this bowl itself was an act of treason. I think one of the most powerful moments in the exhibition is this assemblage of posters made at the SMFA across the street in 1970, in the days immediately following the Kent State Massacre in Ohio. And what you have on view is a selection of about 120 posters that have been acquired by the Prints and Drawings Department since the year 2016. And they're incredibly varied in their imagery. Many of them pick up on earlier themes or earlier reference particular famous works of art, such as this one that says "America Eats Her Young," which is quoting Francisco Goya's painting of Saturn eating one of his children. And they were importantly intended to be used in protest, and they were used in protests around the city of Boston and in Cambridge. Um, they call out, they protest the war, they protest the violence against the members of the Black Power movement, they support labor, and they also frequently quote poetry. So there's a Carl Sandburg poem in this one. Um, and also, and this is important, um, point to note is that it's really, in addition to the variety of the visual vocabulary used here, there is an immediacy and an urgency of the moment that is present in them through the evidence of the haste with which they were made. So many of them are printed slightly askew, which just speaks to like how quickly the students and professors, mostly most of whom we are unidentified. We're trying to get these out to be deployed in actual protest. And another one that I'll just point out, which my co-curator Patrick Murphy pointed out to a group in my presence, was the idea that this one says Friday 4:30, but it doesn't name the date, right? So we know that this was so immediate and imminent. Here, what we pulled out one of the posters and paired it. That is the work on the right, which has the photograph that was circulated and reprinted on newspapers following the massacre. And the student or the artist added the words "Unite now," unite against the war, and we paired it with this photograph or screen print by Richard Hamilton, who's often considered, well, mostly considered the father of pop art, a British artist who was watching on television in London the footage of video footage of the event. And what he's done here is he's taken a photograph of live TV. You can see it's really grainy. And he's reproduced it, which calls attention to how the reproducibility of, or the reproduction of violent imagery desensitizes us to it. And this is something that, he was making this point in 1970, and it's even more true now with the internet and social media. Also in the exhibition is a portfolio of by 25 artists. So it's 25 works on paper by artists, an artist collective who called themselves Artists Against Racism and the War. This portfolio was made right after the as a response to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And there are many. It was a local group of artists, including some that are quite well known. So on the right, Dana Chandler, with his very openly critical image, and then on the left, John Wilson, who we have an exhibition opening on Monday of his work and his legacy in Boston. And so they're all looking at this protesting racism from a different angle. And here we see on the left the cradling and the protection of a young Black life. And this connects up, I think, a little bit with the Tyler Mitchell that we saw in the first room. Artists as activists, we have and the importance of fashion in signaling one's political views. That's something that we're all still doing or choosing not to do, right? And so on the left, uncharacteristically for Richard Serra, a figural work in which he's protesting the Second Iraq War. So originally this work, he wrote "Stop Bush," but then he erased the U and the H with this inscription here. And then the graphic artist Saul Steinberg, who himself fought in World War II, but opposed the Vietnam War, and we see him doing that here in this khaki military shirt on the right. The last subject that I just want to touch on briefly, because I want to leave time for questions, is the importance of the freedom of the press. And here I mentioned, and the sculpture on the right is not in the exhibition. It's a bust of Martin Brimmer, the founding chairman of the board of trustees at the MFA, who owned this statuette, this porcelain statuette of John Wilkes, the English radical journalist who was a hero to our founders. He's mentioned actually in the Liberty Bowl that we saw before, and who many regard as the father of, our contemporary idea of freedom of speech. And we also note the importance of printmaking in the press and the circulation of images. We see here Honoré Daumier being critical of the French crown in 1834 with these two prints. On the right, the press is represented in this brawny fellow in the center. And on the left, he records the massacre, really, and the violence against laborers who were protesting. It's called the Rue Transnona. And then finally, the other major element of this last room is the depiction of people exercising their right to protest in the civil rights movement, of course, exemplified by Rosa Parks, who in the photograph on the left is being fingerprinted after she refused to give up her seat in Montgomery. So I hope you will all come see the show. And I have to admit, Zoom is not my favorite format. It's very disembodying and awkward. So thank you for bearing with me. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. We do have time for some questions. So I just want to remind everyone to just use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to as many as we can. And Phoebe, I'm always a little curious too, in terms of the timing of this exhibition opening last fall, was that luck that it was during an election year and as people were headed to vote, or was that very intentional in the exhibition schedule? I'm sort of personally curious.
It was, yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah,
It was not accidental. It was intentional, but I don't I don't think I fully thought through how the exhibition would evolve in my thinking and other people's thinking as the election and then post-election and now like all like it feels like the exhibition becomes more relevant every day, honestly.
right.
And yet I feel like this was the right time to do it. And um yeah, so it was definitely uh intentional, um, but didn't go exactly as I expected for reasons that
Right.
have to do with things I can't control,
Exactly,
like
exactly.
the world.
Well, we do have a question in about something that we didn't highlight in the exhibition, at least not in the presentation. Is there a peace sign? Is there any work in the exhibition that highlights that sort of imagery of a peace sign? I'm trying to think of the
That's a good
posters.
question. I don't, I can't say with certainty. If there were, it would be in that third room. And I'd have to look a little closer, but I'm happy to do that. But maybe
Sure.
whoever is asking could come and see it and
That's
find
right.
themselves. We do have a lot of Liberty bonnets, Liberty, caps throughout the exhibition. So that's
Yeah.
another sort of scavenger hunt exercise for somebody.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. How many of those can you find?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see if we have other questions. One thing I will mention as people are beginning to type in their questions, which may be something that we didn't fully communicate to you, Phoebe, is that we were able to extend this exhibition one more day through the 17th, so that we could get all
Oh,
3 days of the holiday weekend. It seemed almost short-sighted to close it before President's Day. So um,
especially because it's President's Day.
it's President's Day, so we have a little
Yeah.
extra treat for
And we have
folks.
Washington and Lincoln. Yeah, we have Washington and Lincoln in the exhibition. I didn't even think about that.
Right.
Yeah,
So good news for everyone who has yet to see it. You have a bonus day for the holiday weekend. Um,
wonderful.
let me see. As we get questions coming in, give me just one moment. Is there a specific item included in the exhibit that resonated with the teens you worked with more than the others? Was there something that particularly struck them?
Yeah, so they each wrote a label for something that was of interest to them. And so there's one teen label about the Sandow Burke monumental, the whiteout monumental arch.
Hmm.
And then there was one of them wrote about the Alexandra Bell photographs. I didn't talk too much about them, but the ones in the Freedom of the Press area, where the artist is critiquing the New York Times. New York Times is reporting of the Unite the Right, the Charlottesville rally.
Hmm.
And then another one chose. There's a big it's like a cardboard poster, circular poster called Stop Racism Now. One of the teens wrote about that.
Hmm.
Another one wrote about the Richard Serra Stop BS. And then the last, I think, wrote her label about the one of the posters uh, in that takes up the issue of migration. So those were,
Ah,
yeah. So those were some of their favorites, because they got to choose whatever they wanted to write on.
and those were the choices. All good
Hmm.
choices too. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of accolades coming in about the exhibition and how
Thank
much
you.
folks enjoyed it. Um, let me see. A great question to think about. While you were in the process of curating this exhibition, was there anything along the way that particularly surprised you or made you reconsider something that you thought you knew or perhaps understood about democracy?
Mm,
It's a good
that's a
question.
really good
Someone to
question.
think about.
I mean, I think what I learned in the exhibition is how little civic education I received growing up, even at my super elite schools
Hmm.
that I attended. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to do the exhibition, because I think, and I alluded to this at the beginning, but I didn't really emphasize it enough, is the importance of visual learning in visual learning as civic learning. And that's why I think this exhibit, like an exhibition like this in a museum, really emphasizes the role of the museum as a place of civic engagement and civic learning. Because um, even if we learn in school and we read books, like not everybody, there's a certain amount of like some people learn very well doing that, and then like other people are visual learners. And one of the things that we've been, I think, trying, getting better at as an institution over the years um, is being more embracing of different learning styles.
Hmm.
So I think this show, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, what did I learn that was, the other thing, somebody asked me yesterday, I gave a talk at BU Law School, never spoken to a law school before, in
Hmm.
my curatorial work or any other reason. And one of the students asked me why was this so important to like recognize um, like the power of images about democracy like in our culture. And I think my answer to that is that we tend to be kind of passive in what we see. Like we're receiving all this,
Yep.
and if we're not careful and if we don't think critically and try to like unpack things, we can be like, images are very persuasive. I think that's where I'm going with this. This is a bigger claim about, visual media and images, not just, works of fine art, but like they're very persuasive. They make arguments. And
Mhm.
so we have to kind of like really think through what we're seeing more actively than I think we do generally as a culture.
I would agree. Yeah, I can see. Well, perhaps one last question, perhaps. So the question is, did you find that any ancient examples of democracy in art connected more to modern pieces in the collection, or were you able to find sort of similar symbolism maybe in an ancient piece to a current piece?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean the one of the connections is that Liberty Cap symbol.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure though that that's the question. Can you read it again? Sorry.
Did you find that any ancient examples of democracy in art connected to more modern pieces in the collection? I'm thinking of
Yeah. So
the coin maybe that you mentioned, or perhaps that's sparking the.
yeah, the coin and also this like the Lincoln the political cartoon was an oil sketch. I didn't really have a chance to talk about it in detail. But where Lincoln is beating back the dragon of rebellion, like that iconography of like the heroic leader like
Mm,
subduing a monster, right? Is like goes all the way back to Gilgamesh, honestly. But like,
right.
we first encounter it in the exhibition and with Heracles and the Nemean lion. So these sort of motifs of like protection and overcoming, like assassinating tyrants and so forth. So like those are some some examples. I mean, yeah, there are other
Some sort of common themes, right? Yeah.
or
Yeah.
just motifs, yeah.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot more, topics of the relationship between war and democracy, and imperialism and democracy, which is I mean, Athens had a big empire. That's what
Mm,
fueled their economy. The economy helped them sustain their democracy for a time. There's quite a lot of resonance, but you also have to be careful not to exaggerate, the connections.
true, true. Well, thank you so much again, Phoebe, for joining us and taking time out of your day to talk to us about this really fascinating and, as you mentioned, like really timely exhibition. And again, for those of you joining us at home, if you have not seen Power of the People, Art and Democracy, I encourage you to plan your next visit to the MFA. And like I mentioned, you have a bonus day. It will be open through President's Day weekend through February 17th. And of course, as MFA members, this exhibition is included in your free daily admission benefits. So I want to thank Phoebe again and all of you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to welcoming you all in person soon. Have a great night and stay warm in the snow.